Part 28. John reached the outer door first, and tried it. Locked. The Terminator smoothly unslung the M79 blooper, opening the breech. "Get back," he commanded as he pulled a grenade from the bandolier over his shoulder and slid it into the bore. He flicked his wrist, snapping the breech shut. Sarah and John had only a split second to duck and cover. The Terminator turned and aimed, saying, "Cover your ears and open your mouth." They did, just as the cyborg pulled the trigger. 20 feet away, the door and half of the wall around it erupted outward. The backblast hit the Terminator full force, but he strode through the smoking hole before the debris had hit the floor. The Terminator led John and Sarah down the dark corridor. Tear gas seeped under office doors and hung in the air. They started to cough. She pulled off her breathing mask and handed it to John. The Terminator moved ahead of them, reloading the blooper as he walked. Up ahead was another security door. He closed the breech with a wrist snap and fired, one-handed. The door vanished in a thunderclap. Plaster chunks and burning debris showered around him. He, of course, didn't flinch or slow down. John and Sarah followed the man-machine into another corridor. The Terminator reloaded the grenade launcher. In the now quiet, smoke-filled lab, the SWAT leader moved cautiously through the room. Cat-stepping, he circled around a desk, then crisply leveled his rifle at Miles Dyson, who was not quite dead. He knew he would be, very soon. He had propped himself up against the desk, holding a heavy, technical manual right over the plunger of the detonator, sitting upright on the floor. The message was clear. "Shoot me. The book drops on the plunger. Adios." Dyson wheezed, trying to draw enough breath to talk. "I don't know how much longer I can hold this thing." The SWAT leader saw the wires, the claymores, the gas cans all around him for the first time. Even wearing a gas mask, the sudden fear in his eyes could be seen. He made an emergency command decision. He abruptly spun and motioned his squad to retreat. "Fall back! Everyone out! Move it! Out now!" They obeyed so fast they crashed into the next group coming up the stairs. The Terminator reached the main elevators and hit the button as Sarah and John were close behind, coughing and stumbling into the smoke-filled hall, body breathing with a single mask. The doors opened, they all got in, and the elevator headed down. Dyson was lying amid the ruins of his dream, sprawled on the floor, his back propped up against the desk, bathed in his own blood, which ran out in long fingers across the tiles. His breathing was shallow and raspy. He still held the book, trembling, above the switch. He saw something nearby on a pile of now very expensive junk, the photograph of his family. He reached for it, balancing the book as he leaned over and put it in his lap. His wife and children smiled up at him through the broken glass. A tear trickled from his eye. He was not going to be able to live any longer. His whole body told him that. And a voice in the back of his head, his voice, but somehow different, calmer, said simply, "You can leave now." But he wanted to see his kids one more time and explain to them why he was going so soon. They wouldn't know what he knew, what he saw now beyond the photograph of his family. A flash of white-hot light blossoming out of the atmosphere. And what he heard. The megaphones, the helicopter, distant sirens all became fainter, replaced by a roaring that swelled as the white flower in the sky became a roiling cloud of red and black. Blood-red fire boiling up through a cloud mass black as iron. It was the cloud column of a hydrogen bomb, shaking the earth with its unimaginable power. But then Dyson saw it began to recede. The thunder rolled away, dying into a wind that was like the last winds of a great storm, ebbing into a soothing breeze as the iron clouds were swirled away, giving way to a soft, gauzy light. And out of it came Danny and Blythe, running towards Dyson, laughing. Teresa was behind them, smiling. They were in a bright sunlight, running down a green field, right into the ruined lab. Dyson drew on this slice of memory, so vivid and precious, so he could face eternity. Or was it a gift from outside? He didn't know. He could sense a deep connection with the things of this earth beginning to slip, and the yearning to see his family once more began to seep away, and a droll sense of irony rolled in after. It was almost funny, it seemed to him, lying there like a stuck pig, the sacrificial lamb bleeding on the debris of his life's work. Silly people, that they had to go to such extremes to save themselves from their own tools of war. And he saw himself, in his own past, a serious man with a mission, coming out of the chaos of the ghetto into the bright light of knowledge of things, and for a moment he understood the necessity of playing the material game while here. He had done it very well, he had to admit. But now he was dying. He wanted to stay and become that other Dyson, the loving man as dedicated to his family as he used to be to his science. Dyson wanted to laugh, but he thought he would break apart and make a bigger mess than he already was. So he didn't. Instead, he looked up again to see his family. Their hair was blown by the wind. The wind he knew now was blowing through history itself, changing it forever, from what it was. And he thought, men can will their destinies, if the fates allowed. Life would go on, but history was dead. Miles Dyson's gaze was fixed, seeing what no living man could see, and because of that dying vision, there was the faintest hint of a smile. But the instant the light faded from his eyes, his arm dropped, and the book hit the switch. The police outside were still waiting tensely for the expected bloody climax, guns out, crouched behind their cover. They expected bodies to come out on stretchers, or they expected suspects to be escorted down to patrol cars, or they expected the SWAT teams to retreat to rearm and regroup. What they didn't expect happened. The whole gleaming face of the building exploded in an eruption of glass and fire. The second-floor windows showered the parking lot, and a huge fireball shot out like the devil's tongue, leaping into the sky. The helicopter rapidly banked away from the heat. Burning debris fell among the cop cars, and a number of officers broke ranks, pulling back in barely controlled panic. One of them, a motorcycle cop, seemed to be moving with purpose, through the disorganized crowd towards the burning building. He slowed only once to grab at a fleeing cop and rip his weapon out of the holster. Then the T-1000 gunned the cycle through a shattered window, across an office, and out into the hall. It was scanning with full intensity, its consciousness aflow with the environment. In moments, it detected a stairwell and accelerated up the steps in one howling blast of RPMs. It brodied onto the second floor, which was now a smoke-filled maze. The T-1000 drew a Heckler & Koch MP5K machine pistol and cruised slowly into the firelit offices, relentlessly scanning. In the corridor, the cycle skirted one more flaming wreckage as it idled forward. The T-1000 scanned the leaping shadows for its prey. In the downstairs lobby, the elevator doors parted and Sarah eased a look out into the corridor. The walls on either side of her erupted with bullet hits. The SWAT had the lobby end of the corridor blocked off. Sarah and the others were totally trapped, cut off, and screwed. John turned to his mother and tried to cheer her up. "Don't forget, it's always darkest right before you're totally fucked." The SWATs fired a tear gas grenade toward the elevator. It spewed the vicious CS gas out in a swirling cloud that enveloped Sarah and John, who were pressed against the back wall of the elevator. The Terminator had finished his own rapid scan of the lobby emplacements, then turned to them and said, "Keep your eyes closed. Don't Move." They nodded and squeezed their eyes shut. As the Terminator slung the grenade launcher over his shoulder and started out of the elevator, he said, "I'll be back." A tear gas grenade ricocheted from wall to wall as it flew down the corridor. It skidded to rest in front of the Terminator, throwing out a white cloud that quickly filled the area. In the elevator, Sarah and John were choking, handing the breathing mask back and forth desperately. They were trapped now, and the claustrophobia of poisoned air and the tiny readout of the elevator car oppressed John to the point of panic. He was only moments away from lurching out from cover and into the corridor. The SWAT team stood at the far end of the hall, gripping their weapons, watching the boiling cloud, waiting for the suspects to stumble out of the elevator and into their line of fire. Someone appeared out of the smoke, incredibly, walking calmly, totally unaffected. The Terminator was not even misty-eyed. Not at all what they expected. The leader spoke through a megaphone. "Stop where you are! Lie down on the floor, face down! On the floor, now!" He continued to stride towards them, as if not hearing or caring. The SWAT team tensed up. They'd never saw anything like this. Closer and closer he came. The leader made another command decision. "Drop him!" The corridor was abruptly filled with crackling thunder. The rounds tore into the Terminator's chest, stomach, face, thighs. His leather jacket, already punctured in 24 places, was now ripped to shreds as the rounds hit him. The SWAT leader grasped for the obvious in the face of the impossible, thinking the guy must be wearing body armor. So he lifted his sights and fired directly into the suspect's face. His head should have been taken apart like a ripe melon. Instead, it simply rocked slightly, and a tear in the cheekbone spouted blood. Still, the man kept coming towards them. The SWAT did what they were trained to do: hold the trigger down. "Aim for the face!" the leader shouted, thinking somehow his bullets must have been defective. But a man next to him shouted, with a trace of fear in his voice, "I am!" The Terminator smoothly drew his .45. His internal scanner flashed. Threat assessment. Termination override. Disable only. Without particular hurry, as if he were glancing at the shelves in a supermarket, he selected his targets. He shot the nearest man in the left thigh. As he screamed and dropped, the Terminator bent down and picked up the shrieking man's tear gas launcher. It was one of those new rotary jobs that held 12 rounds in a big drum. The Terminator shot the next SWAT square in the chest with the tear gas launcher. The gas canister hit the man's body armor and didn't penetrate, but it was like getting slugged in the stomach with a full swing from a baseball bat. The SWAT folded double and hit the tiles, gasping. The Terminator was an image from hell, a tall figure in shredded black leather, streaked with blood. One eye was now a bloody socket, the metal eye servos glinting. The flesh of one cheek hung down in tatters, revealing the chrome cheekbone beneath. The whole front of his jacket was blown open, revealing his metal chest. Some of the remaining SWAT were close enough to see all this. It was too much to see. Even in the heat of battle, even against the grain of their training, they began to fall back. One turned to run and, kapow, a gas canister nailed him in the back, sending him sprawling. The Terminator fired 3 gas grenades into the lobby. It filled rapidly with the white gas, cutting the visibility to a few feet. It was total pandemonium. The SWAT leader crouched in the fog, white-knuckling his rifle, completely at a loss for what was happening. The Terminator loomed suddenly out of the mist, right in front of him. Before the team leader could react, there was an explosion and a white flash and a dull thud, as the Terminator's bullet drilled into his leg. As he screamed and dropped the rifle to clutch his leg, the Terminator ripped his gas mask off. The SWAT leader fell back, writhing to the floor, choking and gagging, mindlessly clutching his ruptured thigh, trying to stem the trickle of blood. The Terminator walked up to two SWATs at the front of the door. Pow, pow, leg and leg. He snatched off their masks as they fell. Then the gunfire stopped. Nobody could see anything. Screams and whimpers echoed in the smoke. Smoke boiled out of the front door as a figure emerged, firing the tear gas launcher with one hand. The Terminator launched all remaining rounds among the police vehicles. Unprotected officers ran back, choking and half blind, slamming into cars and tripping over each other. It was a total rout. At the SWAT van, one of the men was rapidly handing out the remaining masks to unprotected cops. A figure appeared out of the smoke beside him. He looked up as the Terminator handed him the empty launcher. Instinctively, he grasped it. Then the Terminator ripped off his mask, grabbed his flak vest with one hand, and sailed him out into the mist. The cyborg strode the length of the van and climbed into the driver's seat. No keys in the ignition. He flipped down the sun visor. The keys fell into his hand. The Terminator took a microsecond to note something. He was learning. He started the van and slammed it into gear. In the lobby, the tear gas had cleared to a thin haze. The uninjured SWAT were tending their wounded, confused. They looked up at the sounds of shouts and a roaring engine. The SWAT van crashed through the front doors in an explosion of glass and debris. Cops scattered as the van screeched across the lobby in a smoking 180, sliding to a stop across the corridor that led to the bank of elevators. The Terminator backed up until... crunch. He sealed the corridor with the back of the van. Sarah and John heard the crash and saw the van backing into the corridor. They happily stumbled out of the elevator, coughing, and ran along the hall and leaped into the back just as the Terminator hit the throttle. The van roared across the lobby and exited through the blown-out windows, scattering cops in every direction. All but one. At the sound of the battle below, the T-1000 gunned the big Kawasaki up to an office window and looked down to see the van tearing away across the parking lot, with the remaining police ineffectually firing at it. It knew it had reacquired its target. It rapidly scanned the area, analysing options. Through an open office door at the far end of the hall, it saw the helicopter hovering outside the building. There were other ways of reaching the target, but this one seemed the most natural channel. The T-1000 sensed all the best possibilities funneling towards it, as if it were an energy sink. Magnetically pulled by the rotating blades, the T-1000 twisted full throttle on the powerful cycle. It reared up and then blasted down the narrow corridor and into the office, accelerating fast, straight at the window. The T-1000 blasted out through the glass, airborne on the motorcycle. It rocketed across the gap to the hovering chopper and slammed into the canopy. The impact of machine and rider radically pitched the chopper. The startled pilot fought to regain control, when the weight shifted again, as the cycle tumbled to the pavement below. The T-1000 didn't. It clung to the shattered canopy. Nightmarishly, the pilot watched as the T-1000 punched its head through the plexiglass canopy and rapidly poured itself through the jagged hole. It instantly solidified into Officer Austin on the passenger seat. It grabbed the gaping pilot and hurled him out of the cockpit, then slid behind the controls. The chopper was auto-rotating, spinning out of control, dropping towards the parking lot. The T-1000 recovered control 10 feet above the ground. Cops hit the deck as the tail boom swung around, going over them by inches, then dipped as the chopper lifted out in a power climb, roaring away across the parking lot towards the fleeing SWAT van.